The list of NHL records is very long, and the majority of these records are held by players that are no longer active. The game has been around for a very long time and has seen some unbelievable talents pass through. When looking up NHL records, you're going to see a lot of Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Gordie Howe, the all-time greats. However, in this video, I want to take a look at some NHL records that are held by active players. Just as a heads up, this is the third installment of this video on my channel. I've made 2 of these before, so if there's any records that you're wondering why aren't they in this video that are held by active players, there's a chance that they could have been featured in one of the previous 2. If you're new to the channel and you want NHL content like this all year round, hit that subscribe button and let's go ahead and get started. It's no secret that Tage Thompson had a pretty underwhelming start to his career for a first-round draft pick. He was selected by the Blues 26th overall in 2016. The Blues moved on from Thompson relatively early as he played just 41 games for the franchise before being dealt to the Buffalo Sabres as part of that blockbuster deal that sent Ryan O'Reilly from Buffalo to St. Louis. Thompson didn't look like anything special during his first 3 seasons with the Buffalo Sabres, and it was actually reported after he finally broke out by Elliot Friedman that the Buffalo Sabres once almost traded Tage Thompson for a 5th round draft pick. Thankfully for the Buffalo Sabres, that never happened because over the past 2 seasons, Tage Thompson has blossomed into superstardom. If you combine his totals from the past 2 seasons, there is only 9 players in the NHL who have scored more than Tage Thompson's 85 goals during that time period. And during this stretch of incredible play, Tage Thompson has had some massive games, including a 5-goal, 6-point effort in a 9-4 win over the Columbus Blue Jackets in December of 2022. It was a historic night for Tage Thompson. His 5 goals were the second most ever in a road game. His first 4 goals of the game came just 16 minutes and 40 seconds into the first period, which is the second fastest 4-goal effort to begin a game in league history. Only Joe Malone bested that mark as he did it in 8 minutes and 45 seconds, but that was back in 1921. Those 4 goals in the first period, though, are tied for the most goals in a single period in NHL history. He does share this record with 13 others, but he is still one of the record holders nonetheless. When it comes to Patrik Laine, because of how his tenure with the Winnipeg Jets ended, the team that selected him 2nd overall in the 2016 NHL draft, it's really easy to forget just how dominant this guy was during his first 2 NHL seasons as a teenager. During Patrik Laine's sophomore season in 2017-18, he posted a career-high 44 goals and 70 points in 82 games, and during that sophomore season, Patrik Laine put forth probably the most incredible stretch of play by a player before their 20th birthday. Laine would set a new NHL record for the longest point streak by a teenager in NHL history, lasting 15 games, breaking the record that had been previously set by Nathan MacKinnon, who had a 13-game point streak as a teenager. And it's not like Patrik Laine was just barely keeping this point streak alive either, picking up a secondary assist, maybe adding a goal, an assist this game. This was a completely dominant stretch of play. Over this 15-game streak, Patrik Laine scored 18 goals and added 8 assists for 26 points. Utterly ridiculous production from Patrik Laine as a sophomore. He wound up finishing that season 2nd in the league in goals, only behind Ovechkin, who had 49. Jonathan Huberdeau is the only player that this video features that has set an NHL record in back-to-back seasons. 2 completely different records, but they do correlate with one another. One record that Jonathan Huberdeau should be, and I'm sure is, very proud of, and another one that I'm sure he'd like to forget. Let's start during the 2021-22 season, his final year with the Florida Panthers, and production-wise, the best season of Jonathan Huberdeau's career. In 80 games, Huberdeau put up 30 goals and 85 assists for a team-leading 115 points. Those 115 points were actually tied for the 2nd most in the entire NHL that season. He was tied with Johnny Gaudreau. The only player with more points than those 2 was, of course, Connor McDavid. His 85 assists that season set an NHL record for the most assists in a single season by a left winger. Now, position-by-position records are kind of difficult sometimes because, especially with forwards, wingers definitely, guys will play multiple positions. They'll jump back and forth between right wing and left wing, but among NHL players who are listed as left wingers, his 85 assists is the most in a single season ever. During the summer of 2022, Jonathan Huberdeau would then of course be involved in my opinion, one of the biggest trades in NHL history, as he, along with Mackenzie Weegar and a draft pick, were sent to the Calgary Flames in exchange for Matthew Tkachuk. And we all know how Jonathan Huberdeau's first season went with the Calgary Flames. It was a complete disaster. The Calgary Flames missed the playoffs, and in 79 games, Jonathan Huberdeau put up just 15 goals and 40 assists for 55 points. points, which set a new NHL record for the largest season-to-season point drop-off by a player in NHL history, going from 115 points in 21-22 to just 55 in 22-23. That is a 60-point drop-off from season to season, which is insane, and unfortunately for Jonathan Huberdeau, if you ask me, that's a record that's probably going to stand for quite some time. In my opinion, what made the Tampa Bay Lightning so dominant during their peak when they won back-to-back Stanley Cups in 2020 and 2021, sure, they had the star power, they had the top-end talent, but they were incredibly deep as well. During their runs to those back-to-back Stanley Cups, the Tampa Bay Lightning had a third line that consisted of Blake Coleman, Yanni Gourde, and Barclay Goodrow, which very quickly became extremely popular amongst the NHL community for how fun of a line that was. All three extremely high-energy, high-motor guys. That line was a forechecking nightmare, made the Tampa Bay Lightning so tough to play against, and made them such a tough matchup for basically every team in the league, because at times that third line looked like Tampa Bay's best line. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Tampa Bay Lightning probably don't win back-to-back Stanley Cups without those three guys. During the Tampa Bay Lightning's first run to the Stanley Cup with this core in 2020, one of those three players on that third line actually set an NHL record during that postseason, and that player was Blake Coleman. Any guesses on what the record he set was? If you guessed that the record had something to do with hits or physicality, you would be correct. During the 2020 playoffs, Blake Coleman set an NHL playoff record for the most hits in a single playoff run with 126. It took the Tampa Bay Lightning 25 games to capture the 2020 Stanley Cup, so that is about an average of 5 hits per game from Blake Coleman during that playoff run. Just an absolute nightmare of a line to play against. I think everybody that plays fantasy hockey or even fantasy basketball, fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy sports of any kind has some kind of story of one singular player being solely responsible for them either winning that week in fantasy or the entire fantasy league. And for me, just this one game, not even an entire week of good games, this one singular game from Mikas Advantage is the only reason why I made the fantasy hockey playoffs in my league in 2021. In March of 2021, in a 9-0 thrashing by the New York Rangers over the Philadelphia Flyers, Mikas Advantage exploded for 6 points in one period. 3 goals, 3 assists, all coming during the second period of play, a period in which the New York Rangers would have put up 7 on the Philadelphia Flyers. And with that performance, Mikas Advantage would join Bryan Trottier as the only other player in NHL history to have a 6-point period, and was also the sole reason why I made the playoffs in my fantasy hockey league that year. I can't remember exactly how many fantasy points Advantage had. Everyone's fantasy league is different. It all just depends on how the commissioner does the point system, but I think it was somewhere in the range of like 45 to 50, which is ridiculous. During the COVID-shortened 56-game season of 2021, Jack Campbell was one of the biggest stories of the entire year for the Toronto Maple Leafs. After coming over to the Leafs in a trade with the Los Angeles Kings around the 2020 NHL trade deadline, the 2021 season was set to be Campbell's first full year with the Maple Leafs. Of course, it didn't end up being a full year since it was just a 56-game season, but his first start-to-finish season with the Leafs. Jack Campbell would finish that 2021 season with a wild 17-3-2 record, a 2.15 goals against, and a .921 save percentage. Had Jack Campbell played more than just 22 games, there's a good chance he would have been in contention for the Vezina Trophy. And although Jack Campbell did not win the Vezina Trophy in 2021, he did get his name in the history books as he set an NHL record for the longest win streak by a goaltender to start a season at 11 games. The Toronto Maple Leafs had a dominant 2020-21 regular season in that all-Canadian division, and Jack Campbell played a massive part in that. And then, of course, the playoffs came around, and that's a completely different story, but we won't beat that dead horse. Responding well after being scored on is a huge part of the game. You don't just want to roll over and let the opposition just continue to build and build momentum after scoring a goal. And on January 5th of 2016, Mikhail Granlund gave the Minnesota Wild the quickest response in NHL history after being scored on. Now, albeit the stakes weren't very high in this situation, as the Minnesota Wild held a 3-1 lead over the Columbus Blue Jackets before the Blue Jackets would cut that lead down to 1 with just 15.3 seconds left in the third period. With their only being that little time left on the clock, the Blue Jackets would leave the goaltender out, keep the extra attacker on the ice, and as soon as the puck was dropped, Mikhail Granlund would win the faceoff, shoot the puck into the empty net just 2 seconds after the Columbus Blue Jackets scored to cut the lead down to 1. In doing so, Granlund would tie the NHL record for the fastest goal after being scored on at just 2 seconds, a record that had been set originally by Doug Gilmour on December 19th of 1987. So that is going to wrap up today's video. Those were a handful of NHL records that are held by active players. Like I mentioned at the start, if there's any NHL records held by active players that you guys are curious as to why they weren't in this video, I did make 2 videos just like this on the channel a couple of years ago, so they could be in one of those. I also left some off because I really enjoyed putting this video together, and I'd like to be able to post another one for you guys sometime in the future. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. That is the best way to show your support. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all soon.